Hi, my name is Michael Lamb and I help with level design, programming, and audio. In the beginning, I was in charge of creating the player controller in the Soundwave function. As time went on, I noticed that the player controller had to change because I didn't have the player controller component attached to the player. I was using the rigid body and using some coding which manipulated the player to move around but caused the player to walk through walls and objects once in a while. So after adding the player controller component, I had to rewrite the player movement script for it to work correctly. Even though the Soundwave function worked, some people didn't like how it changed in size while the player was moving around. So we went in and made it a fixed trigger object and would basically go in and out in a sequence while the player was moving around, and depending whether the player is running or walking, it varies in size. I was also in charge of the UI and HUD, which held most of the visual feedback for the player. Our instructor's main concerns were about player feedback. They were always harping on us about player feedback. So not only is there feedback in the HUD, but there's also feedback audio and visual feedback with animations. I was also concerned about what would happen to the player's progress when exiting the game. I programmed all the loading and saving data in the game, along with creating the main menu, the in-game currency, level selection, and in-game store. Another one of my concerns was that every player likes different options. Every player likes different controls. So in the pause menu, I gave the players the options to adjust the mouse sensitivity, brightness, and music volume, which actually saves that value every time you leave the game and go back in. Those values still stay the same. I have learned quite a bit working on this project. At first I was unsure how to load and save game data, but once I figured that out and got the hang of it, it became really natural to me. I learned how to manipulate the UI objects using scripts, which most of them need temporary variables, which will pop up in the debugger, giving you errors telling you that they need temporary variables.
Life on the Line is a puzzle game in which you must use stealth, as well as the tools that you find throughout the levels to escape from prison. The game doesn't very much differ from what we intended it to be, as this was our original vision. The gameplay is very smoothly, with the main system's mechanics being your stealth, as well as the tools that you find throughout the levels to escape and solve the puzzles that you find throughout the game. The current game, like I said, does compare very closely to our initial vision, as we had originally wanted it to be this way.
Working with the AI was both interesting and difficult. Difficult in the fact that a lot of what they had to do was very hard to actually find a way to implement in a way that works. Interesting, though, in that all of those had to be done in very interesting ways that I learned from by doing so. One of the biggest ones was how they actually hear the player. How they hear the player right now is when the player takes a step, it creates a sound wave that it will eventually come into contact with a guard. When the guard hears it, they will look towards where they believe the sound came from and start walking towards it. If they see the player, they'll begin to follow the player before getting close enough to see that they are the player and start chasing them down. If not, they will reach the point where they think the player was, and they'll actually look around to see if the player is nearby. This actually started out in a way where the sound was constantly emitting from the player, and it didn't work well. It actually changed to the player creating a sound wave object wherever they step, and it grows from there.
One technique we used was iterative programming. This included using arrays in conjunction with for loops. The primary application of this technique involved creating an array of game objects, then creating an array of scripts that would each be a component of those game objects, and then populating the array of the game objects by assigning objects of the script file type. Then, when we want to call functionality from the script of one of those game objects, we'd simply loop through the array of game objects until the right one met the conditional, and then we'd call whatever functionality we needed from the script for only that one game object. This method was used to future-proof repeated game objects, since simply prefabbing a parent game object created too many limitations.
For the art feeling for this game, we wanted a realistic prison feel to it. We really didn't draw much out or hand design it. We basically went with what we know of what prisons look like, and basically we took a few images from the internet and kind of combined them together and use them as JPEGs and import them into Unity and use that as our assets until we were introduced to the art team, who tremendously helped us out with most of the art in the game. For the level design process, me and another teammate were working on this. And when we were building these levels, what we wanted to introduce the player to was puzzles and making them use the tools and resources they have in the game and find a way to escape